single pensioners is growing.
At a nursery in Tottenham, the Social Security Secretary spreads the message with missionary zeal. Poverty is not inevitable. The vast gap between rich and poor concerns her, but her solution is neither to tax the rich nor put benefits up for the poor. For this government, the mantra is work, work, work.
The reason people are being left behind is because there's no one in that household who's working. And therefore the key issue for us is to ensure that they can be better off, those poorest families, same as everybody else is getting better off. And the key to that is enabling them to work.
The gap between the haves and have-nots has grown dramatically since 1979. The incomes of the poorest have actually fallen by just under
on specific targets has begun. But the devil is in the detail and in the interpretation of what is meant by dangerous interference with the climate system.
This summit will put off for another couple of years the inevitable day when governments have to act on this issue, as the writing gets ever more clear on the wall that we have a problem with enhancement of the greenhouse effect. The sad thing is that the longer we leave it, the deeper we have to cut emissions, and the more we're going to cause economic disruption as we deal with the problem on a panic basis, instead of dealing with it in an orderly manner and just face up to the challenge of restructuring the way we use energy over a period of a couple of decades.
International cooperation is essential if global warming is to be curbed and sustainable development guaranteed. It's likely to be a struggle, taxing the abilities of governments.
If the sea level rises, it isn't the Dutch that are going to be hurt the most, because they can afford to continue to raise the height of their dikes, and they'll just go on merrily with a slight reduction in their standard of living because they'll spend money on the dikes. That's not what's going to happen in Bangladesh. People are going to get flooded away. They'll get either directly drowned or will starve or be stressed by the loss of agricultural land that they desperately need. So if in the sense of trying to slow down the rates of global pollution that affect climate change, we pay more attention to the need to have sustainable development, the need to see to it that populations are slowed in their growth rates, that the technologies used in developing countries to help them develop are not archaic technologies from the Victorian era, but modern ones. And if they cost more money, we'll have to help put the capital and technology up for them to do that, and we'll all share in the benefit of A, less global pollution, and B, having those countries customers for our products, and C, having those countries less lagging behind us in standard of living, therefore having less stress on world political systems due to inequities. So climate change gives us an opportunity to find a silver lining in that greenhouse cloud, because if it puts a higher priority on solving the problem of global development, we can do two things at once. We can get climate change reduced, potential climate change, and we can also reduce that rich-poor gap, which in my view threatens world security more than anything.
Later today, Bob Langley visits Lough Neagh in Northern Ireland.
In parents and single pensioners is growing.
At a nursery in Tottenham, the Social Security Secretary spreads the message with missionary zeal. Poverty is not inevitable. The vast gap between rich and poor concerns her, but her solution is neither to tax the rich nor put benefits up for the poor. For this government, the mantra is work, work, work.
The reason people are being left behind is because there's no one in that household who's working. And therefore the key issue for us is to ensure that they can be better off, those poorest families, same as everybody else is getting better off. And the key to that is enabling them to work.
The gap between the haves and have-nots has grown dramatically since 1979. The incomes of the poorest have actually fallen by just under 5%. But as you go up the scale, incomes have risen, in the middle by around 25%, while those at the top have shot up by more than 60% since 1979. The figures also show that lone parents like Clarissa Bergunzi are not only the poorest, they're also the most likely to stay poor. But she's unimpressed by the government's argument that work is her only option.
I could do a job that would earn me probably the same standard of living, but then I wouldn't be there for my child. I wouldn't be able to collect her from school, take her to school. And to me that's important as well, more important.
According to today's figures, elderly women are among the most likely to be trapped on low incomes. With a state pension linked only to prices, their standard of living continues to fall behind the working population. The gap between rich and poor actually closed a little in the last years of Conservative rule, but even academics who support many of the new government's policies say it'll have to do more.
Looking at the mix of policies the government's got, there are still groups who are going to remain dependent on benefits. At the moment, policy is still that their benefit levels should remain linked to prices rather than other people's incomes. The effect of that is that as other living standards rise, that group will be left further and further behind.
Unlike their predecessors, ministers in this government believe that the gap between the rich and the poor does matter, and that means they'll have to do something about it. In the end, they'll be judged on whether they've made Britain a more equal society. Neil Dixon, BBC News, Tottenham.
The trial in the United States of the British nanny Louise Woodward, who's accused of murdering a baby in her care, has been told that she'd called him a brat and hated her job. The prosecution alleges that she shook the boy with great force, fracturing his skull.
Louise Woodward's parents arrived at the courthouse to offer moral support to their daughter. Inside, Deborah Eapen continued to give evidence about the death of her baby boy. She was questioned repeatedly about her character as an employer, about the early hours, the long weeks and the late-night curfew on Louise. But the court heard evidence too about the nanny's character, charges that Louise had lied about events on the day the child went to hospital.
She didn't tell you that she had dropped Matthew on the bathroom floor and his head might have hit the area where the tub meets the floor, did she?
No, she did not.
And that negative image was reinforced by a witness who talked to the teenager as they queued outside the theatre.
She called them spoiled. She said they were fussy, mainly talking about the baby being fussing all the time, crying.
And how did she refer to the baby?
A brat.
Did she refer to the job in any other way at that time with you?
That she hated it.
The courtroom was packed with supporters of Louise Woodward on one side and the Eapen family on the other. And the verdict itself will depend on where the jury's sympathies lie, with the bereaved mother or the teenage defendant who could be facing life in jail. Philippa Thomas, BBC News in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Civil service union leaders have demanded a meeting with